Hello everybody, Mortal Wound here, and today we're talking about the dreaded Unit 731 was established in 1936 by the authorization of Emperor Hirohito himself, with Shiroishi being the head of the facilities. Unit 731 was disguised as a water purification plant named Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit of the Kwantung Army. And with the board set, this is when the nightmare would begin. The things I'm going to go over are very disturbing and saddening, since according to American historian Sheldon H. Harris, over 200,000 people were victims of Unit 731. That's just an estimate because we don't know the true number. The main reason why Unit 731 existed is to develop and research biological weapons. But they didn't just test biological weapons, they also tested a variety of things, which I'll get into it in this video. Researchers tested the effects of frostbite, diseases, STDs, and they did this to develop vaccines and treatments for the Japanese army. The victims of Unit 731 were mostly Chinese due to the Japanese expansion into their land, but there were Russians, Mongolians, Brits, Americans, French, Koreans, and this is where we get into some extremely messed up territory, because the experiments conducted at Unit 731 were pure evil. The Japanese researchers at Unit 731 and the other facilities throughout the country viewed these victims as beneath them because they simply weren't Japanese. That was kind of their view on it. And this put them in the mindset of being able to do basically the cruelest things imaginable to these poor people, because they just didn't see them as human. They saw them as just inferior to them, which is kind of the same thing as how the Nazis viewed the Jews. The Jews were beneath them. They weren't human, so they were trying to eradicate them and just destroy them completely. If you were sent to Unit 731, you were praying that you were part of a weapon test, or at least get an easy death, like testing a headshot wound. That way it's quick and relatively painless, because any other tests at the facility were not painless. They were really painful, they treated you horribly, and you were just a little guinea pig to them. Weapon tests, for example, they would tie you to a wooden board, stick it to the ground, and they would chuck a grenade or shoot you, test a bomb, and they would see its effects. They would see a human being get blown up or lit on fire with a flamethrower, and they'd go, interesting. They would take notes. I think that's extremely messed up, and I just don't know how more people don't know about this stuff. It's crazy. And there were, of course, more painful experiments, and I will get into those because I want to share everything there is about this, because it seems not a lot of people know about this, which more people should. It's pretty messed up stuff. Since Unit 731 was originally a facility meant to engineer and test biological weapons, this is where most of the experiments were. Testing biological weapons. You can probably see where this is going. They would test these viruses and diseases, plagues, on the prisoners at Unit 731 before using them on civilians in enemy cities. Yeah, that's pretty messed up. There are two instances of enemy cities being bombed by these viruses, and I'll get back to that later. But now, how did they test these viruses and diseases? Well, it's pretty crazy how they did it. Prisoners were infected with a lot of diseases such as anthrax, cholera, plague, typhoid, and dysentery. And the progression of the disease in the victim's body was documented heavily. They would take notes again, watch you probably just not having a good time at all, and they would just take notes and study you. The scientists at Unit 731 figured out that fleas were the best means of transmission to get these viruses spread quickly throughout an enemy city. Food was also used as a means of transmission. A prisoner, let's say you're really hungry, you haven't been fed in days, weeks even, all you've gotten is crumbs. And the researchers decide to give you a whole loaf of bread or some fruit, like a melon. And then it's actually infected with a disease. And you're now coughing, just sick out of your mind. You are not feeling well at all. And the whole reason of giving this food to you, the prisoner, is to see if it could spread to the entire group. They're testing the effectiveness of the virus. I mentioned 2 incidents earlier that a virus or disease was used on an enemy city. And those 2 incidents, in 1940 and 1941, plague-infected fleas were dropped over the city of Ningbo and Chengdi. These fleas infected the population of the cities and caused a severe epidemic of the bubonic plague. If you couldn't already tell, the scientists and researchers at Unit 731 were extremely evil people. Very evil. And granted, the facility was mainly meant to engineer and research biological weapons, but they also tested a lot of other things. For example, frostbite and how it would affect the human body. They would take the captives outside, freeze the limbs in extremely cold water. An army engineer by the name of Hisato Yoshimura tested frostbite. He researched it by dipping prisoners' limbs in freezing water, letting it freeze, and then he'd get like a sounding stick, hit the limb, and he said it emitted a sound that sounded like when a board is stuck in place, just stuck there. So imagine that sound when he hit the prisoner's arm that was completely frozen. That sound, remember it. The ice on the arm was then chipped away, and the affected area, like a leg or an arm, was then subject to various treatments. Lighting it on fire, freezing it again, or what other things they had in mind in that moment. Vivisection was done to thousands of men, women, and children. Vivisection was also done in Unit 731, and it was done to thousands of men, women, and children. And of course, it was usually performed without any drug or a painkiller that dulls the pain or puts you to sleep, so you don't feel it. No, you were feeling everything as they cut you open and cut you apart. Some prisoners had their limbs amputated to study blood loss. Others, they would cut off the arms off of each of their shoulder and stitch the arms, the opposite ones, to the opposite shoulder. So my right arm would go to my left shoulder. Sometimes some prisoners would have their stomachs removed and then their esophagus attached to their intestines. And parts of organs, such as the brain, your liver, kidney, some parts were just removed. Just taken out of there. Could you imagine a chunk of your brain getting taken out? In other tests, prisoners they didn't get given any food or water, and they would just see how long they could last before they died. And again, they would write some notes down and go, huh, that's interesting. Yeah. Some other experiments included being placed in low pressure chambers until their eyes popped out of their sockets. Or they were hung upside down so their blood pressure would go crazy. Crushed with heavy objects. You know, a centrifuge? Yeah, they would be spun in that until they died. Some would be injected with horse blood, or just animal blood in general, or they'll just inject you with some other thing. And by other things, I mean like seawater, just other ingredients they have lying around that they'll just inject you with and see how it affects you. Oh, and they also burnt you to death, shot you to death, a lot of other messed up stuff too. In addition to the diseases and plagues and viruses they were testing at the camp, they also tested pufferfish poison. They saw how that affected prisoners. To add on to the experiment where they would cut off their arms and test blood loss, they would just keep taking out blood and see how long you would last until you died. Thank God this war ended when we ended it, because if this went on any longer, it probably would have been pretty bad. There would have been a lot more messed up experiments because they would have learned a lot more crazy ways they could have done to the prisoners at Unit 731. Sadly, when the war did end, the remaining prisoners at Unit 731 were cremated and buried, so we couldn't save them before they were killed, unfortunately. Arguably, the craziest part of Unit 731 is that, yeah, sure, some workers and researchers were sentenced and prosecuted for their inexcusable crimes and unspeakable evils they committed. Some other researchers were, for example, we brought some into the US because of the knowledge they had on the human body. Well, we've reached the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching if you got all the way to the end. I'm Mortal Wound. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want more interesting videos. Mortal Wound, out.